fake news, ABC fake news, one of the worst in the business. But as this gentleman is concerned, he's done a phenomenal job. You're mentioning somebody that was extremely controversial. He knew nothing about it, and we can leave it at that. You don't have to embarrass our guest by asking a question like that.
Announced that we are going to increase that $600 billion to almost $1 trillion of investment.
I like that very much.
Trump has chemistry with Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. It was there in his first term and is there in his second as well. That's why when an ABC reporter asked the Crown Prince about the CIA report on Jamal Khashoggi, he said that he would answer the question himself. And he went on to say that you don't need to embarrass our guest. Now, this moment instantly reminded viewers of something deeper. MBS and Trump don't just work together. Their political instincts sync in a way that no other US-Saudi pairing has done in recent memory. The Saudi prince gets a special ear from President Trump. The prince knows how to charm President Donald Trump, unlike his dismissal of President Biden's request for cheaper oil after the Russia-Ukrainian war in 2022. For Trump, on the other hand, he's delivered on those prices. Similarly, when during the press conference at that White House, when Donald Trump mentioned that the prince would invest around $600 billion, as was agreed during his trip to Riyadh in May this year, the prince interjected and said it's now $1 trillion, suitably impressing his host as it was meant to.
Now you're saying to me now that the $600 billion will be $1 trillion.
Definitely, because what we are signing, it will facilitate that.
And this is where the real story begins. MBS shows up to Washington not as a supplicant, but as someone who knows exactly how to press Trump's buttons and walk away with concrete wins. This is the prince's first visit to the US since 2018, and he got the goodies that he really wanted. US advanced Nvidia chips and those US advanced military jets, the F-35s. The F-35s were previously promised only if Saudi Arabia signed and delivered on those Abrahamic Accords with Israel. But the twist is what makes this moment historic. MBS got those F-35s without giving Washington or Israel what it wanted in the past: normalization with Israel. That alone signals a huge reversal in leverage for the US. When asked about the Abrahamic Accords, the Crown Prince said, "Sure, we want to be part of the Abraham Accords, but we also want to be sure that we secure a clear path of a two-state solution," which of course means that it won't happen, given Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected that two-state solution publicly on numerous occasions. In 2021, under the Biden administration, the deal was suspended for the UAE, mainly out of fear that China would acquire the F-35 technology. In recent years, China and Saudi Arabia have cultivated some military ties. The Chinese military is said to be helping Saudi Arabia build short-range ballistic missiles and acquire more capable ones, as well as learning how to operate them. But this isn't much as compared to the arms relationship that the Saudis have with the US, where Saudi Arabia is the leading buyer of US weapons and has been for many years. But the most remarkable part, Washington is accepting the terms laid out by the Saudis, in essence. That is how far the global balance has shifted. The US wants to keep Saudi Arabia on its side as much as Saudi Arabia once needed the US. The Crown Prince also got a commitment for access to America's most advanced computer chips, which are critical to building those vast data centers, central to his plan to turn his country into an artificial intelligence powerhouse, with those electricity-hungry processors that are going to be powered by the mix of Saudi oil and renewable energy. He made sure that the administration understood, in the run-up to his visit to Washington, that Beijing was willing to step in to supply any technology that Washington was hesitant to provide. But in winning his case to put America's most advanced fighters on those runways of those Saudi Arabian air bases, and the most advanced American chips into Saudi Arabian data centers now, the prince is integrating his country into the American tech stack. And he knows that what's being involved here is much more than jets and chips. And for Washington also, this is a way to pull Riyadh back deeper into its own orbit and away from China's growing influence in the kingdom. And certainly away from exploring those alternative defense partnerships with China or Russia. Washington fears losing the Gulf far more than it publicly admits. And this deal is now proof. The US is now competing and not commanding. Now, coming to China, Despite the symbolism of Saudi Arabia signing security and defense agreements in Washington, none of this fundamentally threatens Riyadh's relationship with Beijing. The Crown Prince's foreign policy is being built on strategic diversification, not necessarily on a bloc loyalty. He's not going to forget easily that the last US president threatened to make him a pariah. Saudi Arabia, for all its closeness to Donald Trump currently, won't rely on a single great power, and especially not the US, which he views as being unpredictable. So even as the kingdom extracts these weapons and guarantees from Washington, China will still remain indispensable partner for energy as well as infrastructure, 5G, drones, ballistic missile cooperation, and long-term industrial development. The only reason the US is offering F-35s and thousands of those Nvidia chips is because of China's influence in the Gulf has already reached a point that Washington can't ignore. Saudis know this and China knows this as well. China also understands that Riyadh's deeper interests remain aligned with Beijing's own long-term gain. Diversifying away from Western dependency, pushing for that de-dollarization in oil trade, and integrating into the BRICS Plus supply chains. Their natural movements as the US becomes one of the plurality of powers and is no longer the sole hyperpower. None of these goals are reversed by that defense deal done with the US. In fact, every time Washington tightens its embrace around Saudi Arabia, it's basically signaling to Beijing that China's own influence has grown strong enough to force America back into the Gulf, with now new incentives and promises. From China's perspective, Saudi Arabia's cooperation with the US is temporary, transactional, and ultimately limited by Congress, Israel's veto, and American political volatility. We know that China-Saudi partnership will be built on a longer-term relationship, economic planning, energy security, and shared multipolar ambitions, which remain very durable as compared to that with the US. But let's dig in deeper into the two big wins that the Crown Prince achieved in Washington this week and why they're important. The Saudis want the advanced fighter jets to keep their military superiority in the region and not against Israel. What they're worried about is more their regional frenemies, if you can call them that: Iran, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and so on. This ensures that any future idea of striking oil facilities, cities, or critical infrastructure becomes a costly gamble. The US has also come to understand that now is the perfect time to strengthen the Saudis as the pillar of stability as Iran has weakened. The Saudis first started showing interest in buying the F-35s in 2012. The F-35s are considered the world's most advanced fighter jet. In 2017, Saudi Arabia, them along with the UAE at the time, publicly expressed an interest in buying the F-35s. Israel was the first country outside the United States to receive the F-35 platform. The first two Israeli F-35I jets arrived in the Nevatim Air Base in southern Israel in December 2016 in the region. The purpose of introducing them was to maintain Israel's air superiority edge in that area. Congress gets to vote on who gets the F-35s, and the wait list is long. About 20 countries either possess the planes or have them on order. So when Saudi Arabia suddenly jumps ahead, it does tell you something. It shows you that Washington is no longer comfortable watching Riyadh drift closer to China, and that the F-35 is going to be used as a leverage to keep a hold on them. In November 2020, the first Donald Trump administration formally notified the US Congress of a planned sale of up to 50 F-35s to the UAE as part of a larger $23 billion arms package. Now, the deal fell through in December 2021 when the Biden administration placed conditions that the UAE rejected. And it is believed that Israel also played a role in ensuring that the UAE did not get anything that took away its own air superiority edge. Now, the current deal with the Saudis has also come despite Israeli objections. The White House fact sheet omits basic facts, such as, for example, how many F-35s the Saudis are going to be allowed to order. But a Reuters report this year in November stated that the Saudi Arabia actually made a direct appeal earlier in the year to the US President Donald Trump to buy up to 48 F-35s. As the Middle Eastern countries became alarmed at the time of the whole-scale widening of the war that Israel was engaged in earlier in the year from Gaza to Lebanon to Syria and Iran. And remember, these aren't theoretical concerns. This year, Israel-Iran's conflict pushed every Gulf state to rethink its own air defenses overnight. And then we also had the Qatar attack that was done by Israel as well. Saudi Arabia asking for the F-35 in that moment basically carries far more urgency than it had at any point in the last decade. In the case of Israel, the immediate concern isn't so much about Saudi Arabia's own potential use of the plane, but rather what they see it as a slippery slope to being given to any other countries that also want it in the region. Turkey, which had paid for its F-35s, did not receive them and were formally removed from the program in 2020 after the country acquired the Russian S-400 missile system earlier in the year in 2019. Now, such sales in the region would erode Israel's advantage and put its own F-35s at a greater risk at a time when the regional balance of power is being shaped largely from the air. Now, they've lobbied in the past to ensure that Turkey or the UAE didn't get it. So they're not happy necessarily about the Saudis getting it either. Technology leaders like Elon Musk and others have also criticized the F-35s made by the Lockheed Martin for its high cost of around $80 to $100 million per plane. It's hugely complex and has massive downtime. However, the jets are extremely stealthy and they can carry large payloads further than 1,300 miles. Equally important are the onboard sensors and the radar that gives pilots an extensive view of the battlefield, as well as its networking capabilities that lets pilots integrate with each other and even control squadrons of these accompanying drones that they are increasingly using nowadays. Israel used the F-35s in its 12-day war against Iran in June. One fear amongst Israelis is that if the Saudis also get them, they'll have the ability to spot the Israeli F-35s in the air. As a stealth fighter, the jet is basically designed to avoid detection by radar and other technologies. It can then use its strike capabilities to attack an enemy's defense and fighter jets before they've even been launched, which is where it gets that air superiority from in any conflict. It was this that allowed Israel to batter Iran's air defenses at the start of its war, giving it that air superiority in Iranian skies. And that's why they don't want any other country to have it in the region. Israel signed a deal last year in June 2024 to acquire another 25 F-35s, which means it will then have a total of 75. Now, the Saudis do have an array of advanced fighter craft already, but these are variants of the F-15, the Eurofighter Typhoon, and the British Tornado. Now, while some of these fighters can carry a bigger payload than even the F-35, but they're fourth-generation warplanes, so they lack the stealth and other technical capabilities of the fifth-generation aircrafts like the F-35s. Now, it's possible to keep the Saudi jets inferior to the Israeli jets because all of this is based on the software packages that is given as permissions to be used within the jet. Israel enjoys unique permissions to modify its F-35s, and this includes the ability to integrate even its own weapon systems and add radar jamming capabilities and other upgrades that do not require US approvals. The Israeli Air Force has rebranded the stealth fighter jet as the F-35I Adir, which is the Hebrew for the word mighty. The reality is that it will take a long time, though, for Saudi Arabia to actually take possession of these jets. And the process could get stuck in a number of ways, whether it's in Congress or derailed by any other development. It's estimated that it's going to take at least 7 years for the first aircraft to be delivered. Now, remember, Trump agreed in 2020 to sell the F-35s to the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, but the deal ultimately fell apart when the Biden administration added its own qualifications. And as I mentioned earlier as well, Turkey, who had actually paid for their F-35s, also got removed from the program when they didn't do what the Americans wanted them to do. Furthermore, in 2008, the US wrote what is called the Israel's Qualitative Military Edge into law, QME. And until that point, since 1973, it was informally considered. Now the law requires that the US must guarantee that Israel always has better weapons than any Arab or regional state. So every time Saudi Arabia, the UAE or Egypt asks for advanced systems like the F-35, Congress must first ask the question, does this weaken Israel's advantage? If the answer is yes, the deal stops. Now, this is where the debate has actually exploded in the US as well. For the first time in decades, mainstream Americans are asking the question, and that's with the rise of the America First supporters, like Tucker Carlson, among others, are saying, why are US foreign arms requiring Israeli consent? Or why has the US given another country a veto-like influence over its own decisions? Now, this is shaking the old consensus. But until the law changes, the reality is that Israel does have this influence. And if it agrees to the F-35 sale to Saudi Arabia, they may decide to use this occasion to actually get access to even higher, more advanced technology and weaponry that the US only makes available, for example, to the Five Eyes countries. This is the intelligence sharing alliance between the US, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the UK. The Israeli newspapers have reported that the IDF has submitted a formal position paper to the Israeli government after the US-Saudi deal has been announced, in which the Israeli Air Force presented an explicit objection to the United States' sale of these advanced F-35 fighter jets to Saudi Arabia, saying that the country's air superiority could be eroded if other countries in the Middle East possess the advanced stealth aircraft. The other real win for the Crown Prince was that the Commerce Department approved the sale of up to 70,000 advanced artificial intelligence chips, the AI chips, to two companies based in the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The US team had struck deals in May in the Middle East, but they were slow walking back those approvals ever since. Now, this is a reversal from earlier this year, when some administration officials rejected the idea of exporting directly to those state-backed companies in the Middle East over security concerns. These approvals will promote continued American AI dominance and global technological leadership, a Commerce Department spokesman said. But this is a major policy reversal, and the speed of the pivot shows that Washington is no longer comfortable leaving that technological vacuum for China to fill. It's exactly the argument that Jensen Huang, the CEO of Nvidia, has been making for months now. I've mentioned this several times in a number of my vlogs as well. He's been telling the president that exporting the American tech stack is necessary throughout the world if we want everyone to be on our technology and not the cheaper Chinese technology. The deal would allow the US companies to sell up to 35,000 of Nvidia's GB300 servers to both G42, which is a state-run AI company based in Abu Dhabi, and Humane, which is the Saudi government-backed AI venture. Now, the GB300 system uses Nvidia's B300 chips, which is part of their Blackwell series, and it's currently one of the most powerful AI processors on the market. Nvidia's competitor Advanced Micro Devices has also come to an agreement worth billions of dollars to work with Humane for Riyadh. These chips aren't simply hardware. They're the foundation of its ambition to become the AI capital of the Global South. For Washington, they leverage and they ensure that the Middle East doesn't fall under China's influence. The agreements include guardrails and cybersecurity provisions to make sure that these chips don't end up benefiting China and the tech company Huawei. The Commerce Department's Bureau of Industry and Security, which oversees export controls, will be in charge of monitoring the compliance. Now, Saudi Arabia and the UAE both want to diversify their economies and share in that wealth which has been created by the AI boom. Now, while this number of AI chips is significant for both countries, to put it into comparison, Elon Musk is building a data center for xAI in Memphis, Tennessee. And in that data center, he's got more than 200,000 Nvidia chips. However, US companies have plans to send several 100,000 chips over the next several years to the data centers that they're operating in the Middle East. The region is becoming very attractive for them because there's governments offering cheap deals with lots of land and lots of free sunshine to run via solar energy to run these data centers and to cool the data centers. xAI, Nvidia, and Humane are also going to work on a data center consuming 500 megawatts, which is enough electricity to power several 100,000 homes for a year. Amazon is also working on a deal to set up data centers there as well. However, Sending even this amount of chips directly to both companies backed by the governments is seen to be significant from a US national security perspective. US security hawks worry that Chinese companies and others will find their ways around the security protocols to access the computing power available. Now, especially since both Saudi Arabia and the UAE have deep relationships with China. Remember, only last month, President Trump was dissuaded by his Secretary of State Marco Rubio and others from allowing even lower-grade Nvidia chips to go to China. Now, the Crown Prince did not get everything he wanted. A nuclear deal, which has been discussed and debated in Washington with the Saudis, has been over a decade and has been pushed again into the future, with the two sides agreeing to some unspecified deadlines for resolving that thorny issue that they have as to whether the Saudis are going to be permitted to enrich their own uranium. That in itself is going to be subject to congressional approval. Now, such capability would give the Saudis self-sufficiency to make nuclear reactor fuel and the technology to build their own nuclear weapons, which has long been the sticking point of why the United States has not agreed. The Energy Secretary Chris Wright has clarified that the nuclear deal currently agreed to does not allow enrichment. Now, that's one red line that Washington won't cross. Jets can be downgraded, chips can be monitored, but once you've given uranium enrichment to a country, those are the keys to a bomb. And the US isn't ready yet to create a nuclear state, in the second nuclear state, I should say, in the Gulf. Israel is the only one there, although it has not declared itself to be one. It was also unclear whether the two sides had reached a full-scale defense pact, which both sides have been declaring is going to be imminent. There hasn't been much public discussion so far about what is it that they've agreed on. The White House has published a document, but it mentions several areas of cooperation. However, they fall well short of the kind of mutual defense commitments that the United States has with, say, Japan or South Korea or even the Philippines. Donald Trump has said he's designating Saudi Arabia a major non-NATO ally. It's a status that only 19 other countries, including Israel, have received. But so are Pakistan, Qatar, and Bahrain. Major non-NATO ally sounds very dramatic. But in reality, it's a diplomatic window dressing. It's useful for headlines. It's irrelevant on any battlefield. It's a symbolic pat on the back, you can say. It's not an Article 5 guarantee that the US would come to your defense in a conflict. And that's what Saudis wanted. What it does signal, however, is that Washington is trying to lock Saudi Arabia into its ecosystem before China does. And the competition isn't about the jets or the chips any longer, but it's really about being and shaping the Gulf for the next 50 years. I'm Najma Minhas with GVS Deep Dive. Do share with me your thoughts and have a great day today.